Hello, my Nakamatachi. This is JoyGirl with a video to discuss Toki's prophecy. But before I begin, I did want to thank you guys for all the love and all the support, especially for the last video where we had a special guest, the Grand Line Review. And like I said at the beginning of that video, I am planning on doing a stream possibly in June, so don't forget to subscribe so that you can keep notified of when exactly that will be. And even if streams aren't your thing, don't forget to subscribe because this is a channel where we have fun discussing One Piece, and so what more do you need? But anyways, let's get on to today's video. So this is a topic that I have touched on in some of my other videos, but it is also a topic that I wanted to talk about in greater detail for quite some time now, and considering that this was the focus of the last episode of the anime, episode 975, I thought this would be a good chance and a good time to actually discuss it in greater detail, especially for anime-only fans who have probably had to steer clear of any of my other previous discussions on the topic. And so on that note, anime-only and manga fans alike, let's get into the discussion. And before we actually get into the prophecy itself, there is a big question that the anime raised for me, and I imagine for some of you as well, which is Toki dead? And the reason I say that is because ever since I read chapter 973, I have been a firm believer that Toki is alive. And if you guys have been following me for some time now, you will know that I'm a big believer in this. And if for those of you who haven't actually watched my Toki theory video, I do recommend that you do so. Although I will have to warn you guys that it is a really early video of mine and also contains spoilers for anime-only viewers. But anyways, the way that Toki's last moments have been animated seems to suggest that she is actually dead, because what we see in the manga in chapter 973 is that as Toki is calling out the prophecy, we see a beast pirate in the crowd holding a gun, and the last panel that we see of her face actually shows her, spitting out more blood. And then the last panel is actually of the crescent moon with the word thump to suggest that she has hit the floor. And then we can see other words to suggest that there are people in the crowd, screaming out of shock or out of fear. In the anime, however, the anime is a lot more detailed and also a bit more graphic. So what we actually see is that she was also shot by an arrow mid-speech. And then she continues on with the prophecy, but then gets shot, and what we actually see is we see her fall to the ground, and then we actually see a blood pool form because blood flows out from the body reflect the crescent moon. And then we see it goes back to her face where she has closed eyes and she calls out her husband's name. She says, Odin's son. And like I've been saying in some of my other videos, this episode was just beautifully animated. I won't go into the details, but for those of you guys who haven't actually been following the anime, I would say that this is a perfect time to jump in. But anyways, let's go back to the discussion. So it does seem like the anime is actually depicting Toki's death, what with the blood pool forming as well as her last words. And then the question is, of course, how much weight do we put into the anime? There are some things that just seems to be, completely off. For example, Sanji being able to beat Drake without, using his raid suit or any other specialized abilities. And then there's also the fact that, like I've mentioned before, that in some other ways, it does seem like the animation team has received some sort of notes or some more information from Oda, and that they are actually adding in details that they are privy to, which we are not. So the anime team may very well know the actual fate of Toki, in which case, is Toki actually dead? But whilst the anime does add more details, it's hard to say that they have portrayed Toki's last moments to be something in a completely different or a completely new way. And what I mean by that is that even in the manga, it was heavily suggested that Toki actually died. And personally, if anything, I actually think that the anime dropped a few more hints to suggest that Toki is actually alive. And there are two things. Firstly, the anime actually fleshed out the scene where Toki is sending the Scabbards to the future, and included in this scene, we actually see Toki entrusting Hiyori to Kawamatsu, and she tells Hiyori that she'll be catching up to her soon. And sure, the rational part of me knows that this could just be a white lie that Toki told her daughter, much like, any other mother would, to reassure the young daughter in such a time of, fear. But me, I like to overthink these details. And so I am thinking that maybe this line was included as a possible hint to suggest that Toki, that we actually might be seeing Toki catch up to the Alliance soon in the present time because Toki survived. The other detail is Toki's final words. So like I said earlier, in the anime episode, we actually see Toki call out her husband's name, say Odin-san, before the episode ends, which wasn't present in the manga. And, maybe these were just Toki's last final words before she actually dies, calling out her husband's name, which is quite natural, to be expected. Or actually, it would just be her thoughts because we didn't actually see her lips move. But I don't know. Why include this little detail? Because it just has a part of me thinking that maybe it's actually a hint that Toki is actually able to, speak or able to think still because she isn't actually dead and because she's just been maybe seriously injured. Maybe she actually has the ability to still be conscious because she hasn't died. And you'll just have to go back to watch my Toki theory video to find out how I think she might have actually survived all of these injuries. But anyways, the main point is that I think Toki is still alive. I will go down with this. But another interesting thing that I found whilst watching the anime episode, which isn't actually related to the Toki prophecy, but I still just wanted to discuss it, was that they also expanded on the fight between Nekomamushi and Inurashi. So we knew from the Zou arc that these two had an argument and that they weren't speaking to each other. And the manga hinted that the reason behind this was because Neko, taunted Kaido and Orochi, and Inu didn't like this because of the possible ramifications that it had on Odin. But considering that when we were introduced to these two, that they had a rift so big that they couldn't even, share the same space together. One had to rule the night whilst the other ruled the day. Just for this to be the reason, in the manga, the bits and pieces that we got whilst reading the manga, I don't know, just felt a little underwhelming to me. Well, the anime actually expanded on this, and we see that Neko wanted to go back and fight, whereas the ever-sensible Inu was trying to stop him, which leads to, what we saw in the manga, with Inu blaming Neko for, taunting Orochi and Kaido, which then resulted in Odin's death, and Neko retorting that, Inu must be the traitor, caring about the enemy's feelings. And in the anime episode, we actually see that their argument was a lot more heated than what we saw in the manga, and they're actually shown to about to physically start fighting, with Inu even saying that he will send Neko to his grave if that's what he wants, because that's what will happen if he goes back to fight, before, of course, the two of them being captured by the number. And I would actually be keen to know and find out, how the two actually survived and, got to Zou, because the manga didn't go into this. And so I wonder if the anime will touch on this. But anyways, the expansion on this fight was, really good to see in the anime episode, because personally it still doesn't, quite justify how two such close friends could have, such a huge falling out to the extent that these two did. But it was nonetheless still good to see, the fight, get more fleshed out. I can just picture that they might have fought and defeated the number together. But then afterwards, they still continued arguing, on top of arguing about Odin, about what they were arguing about before. Now they're also arguing and, blaming each other, that it was each other's faults for them getting separated from the rest of the Scabbards and, thus failing Odin a second time. Anyways, the fight between Neko and Inu has, always been something that's been on my mind ever since the Zou arc. And, like I said, the sort of mini explanation that we got in the manga always felt a little bit lacking to me. So I'd be interested in hearing what you guys think, or, whether you think that, that there is a bit more to it that we haven't seen. So, drop that in the comment below. But for now, let's move on to the prophecy. So I'm not actually going to discuss and theorize on who I think the 9 shadows are. I've touched on this before, and I've discussed the possibility of the Straw Hats actually being the 9 shadows. And if you haven't watched that video, then I do suggest that you do, if only for the sake of joining me in my fantasy of getting to witness the Straw Hats take on Kaido, because how awesome would that be? But in all seriousness, the prophecy of the 9 shadows is a big topic that I think I might want to discuss at some later point, because there are a few things that I want to say. But for today's video, what I actually wanted to discuss is actually to clarify what is happening when Toki is making that prophecy. So the way that I've actually always considered this prophecy, which is often referred to as Toki's prophecy, is that it isn't actually Toki's prophecy. I mean, yes, it was Toki who actually made the speech to, enliven the hope and the spirits of the Wano citizens. But the way I always saw it was that, and the way that I always understood it, is that this is actually Oden's prophecy. And this isn't something that's actually very clear in the anime because we just see Toki, making the speech in front of the citizens of Kuri. But it's a bit more complex than that in the manga. So in both chapter 972 and in the recent anime episode 975, after Toki hears about Oden's death, we see her read a letter that Oden gave to her, which seems to be even before he was imprisoned. And this is where Oden tells her that Wano will fall into a long night before there will be some primary figures who will enter the new world to, stir up some crazy big war, and that it will actually be these figures who will take down Kaido. And that if he should die, that he wants Toki to use her powers. And this is, and we see Toki read up to this point before ripping up the letter. And we see this in both the anime episode and in the manga chapter. What's slightly different in the manga though is that it's suggested that the letter actually didn't end there. After Oden tells Toki to use her power, we see ellipses, 3 dots, to suggest that that wasn't the end of what Oden said. The anime doesn't include that, however, so it just feels like Oden's letter ended there. Now, let's go to chapter 973, which is also animated, where we see Toki fleeing the burning castle. And as she's doing this, we see her have a flashback to a conversation with Oden, where Oden asked her as to whether what Toki has been searching for is for the day when the world will be overturned. In which case, for her to jump ahead 20 years before Toki, stops him and chastises him for suggesting that she jump ahead into the future without him. And as she faces the Kuri crowd, we see her thinking to herself that all this time she has been fleeing. And she's been thinking that someone will pull through for her, that someone will save her. Which for me seems to suggest that now she actually understands that she will actually have to take an active part in saving and helping Wano. And the prophecy, you are the moon, unaware of the dawn. May your purpose be fulfilled and cast 9 shadows on the night woven of 20 years, and you shall know the brilliance of the dawn, isn't Toki's prophecy, but it's actually Oden's prophecy. When Toki makes this speech, it isn't Toki actually prophesizing to the people of Wano, but it's actually Toki reading the remainder of Oden's letter to her. So more so than a prophecy made from Toki to the people of Wano, this is actually a direct order, something that Oden is directly telling Toki herself that she is the moon. And in order for her to see her original purpose in seeing the world overturned, that she must jump forth in time 20 years to experience the dawn. And this actually makes a lot of sense because there are a lot of references and associations to the moon in the Wano arc, and especially in Toki's case, we know that she was formerly an Amatsuki, before she married Oden, which also contains the moon in her family name. And when we were first introduced to her, we see crescent moons on her kimono design. Also, the fact that Toki's prophecy is actually the remainder of Oden's letter to her is actually pretty clear in the manga. So when Toki actually starts, her prophecy, we see that we see that she's speaking with quotation marks. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I've seen this before anywhere in the manga. And so the only explanation that I could have as to why Toki would be speaking with quotation marks is if she's actually speaking someone else's words. And then the rest of the prophecy is actually, is actually shown to us in square blocks, which is the same element, the same sort of, the same feature that was used in chapter 972 when we saw Toki reading, the earlier bits of Oden's letter. And the anime episode doesn't actually go into, all of this detail, however. So it does seem like it's just simply Toki making her speech and thus, Toki making a prophecy. But I think this is a case where we actually are going to have to look at the way that the manga has depicted this scene. Because even amongst manga readers, I think this is a detail that often gets missed. Whenever I see a discussion surrounding Toki's prophecy, I never see the discussion that this isn't actually Toki speaking and that this is actually the remainder of Oden's letter to her. That, this is actually Oden telling Toki what to do. Because if we think about it in that way, then this has a pretty big implication. Because if it is so that Toki's prophecy is actually Oden's letter, that it's Oden's words telling Toki what to do, then what that means is if Toki listened to Oden, then Toki jumped forth 20 years in time. Which means Toki is still alive. And so now I'm pretty curious as to how and or whether the anime will actually correct this. Because if we stick true to the manga, then I think it's pretty clear that Toki's prophecy is actually the remainder of Oden's letter. In which case, I think that also suggests that Toki is still alive. But you can let me know what you think and whether you think that the anime actually confirms Toki's death. But for me, Toki is alive. Unless the Wano arc finishes without showing us Toki until the very last chapter, until that very last panel, I will still be firm in my belief that Toki is still alive. It doesn't matter that we saw the pool of blood in the anime episode, that we saw her, have her final moments and, fall to the ground. In my head, Toki is alive, she's jumped forth in time, and she's going to witness the new dawn with the rest of the Wano citizens, and I just can't wait for it. But let me know what you think by leaving a comment below. Please like and share the video if you enjoyed today's discussion, and please don't forget to subscribe for more discussions just like this one. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.